Okay, good. So I want to say a few things today about kind of about preparing the mind ground for meditative practice. There are, you ever heard that expression, there are levels to this thing? People say that about a lot of things. You know, you see like some amazing athlete do something against some other amazing athlete, people say, there are levels to this thing. You know? So, I don't mean to set such a high bar from the beginning, so let's take it down about 30 notches. But sometimes we tend to think, oh, meditation, I should just be able to like step off the street, so to speak, and just get concentrated and see deeply into the nature of things and experience liberation here and now. Right? So it's easy to kind of think that way. And there's a lot of teachings around now about meditation and mindfulness, and there's a lot of wonderful teachings around and so many places where one can practice in different traditions, and there's so many. I mean, I'm sure there's some not great teachers and some mediocre teachings available, but there's a lot of wonderful, rich traditions, and actually kind of fairly valid, I count myself in that category, fairly valid teachers, good enough to not mess the stuff up terribly, you know, and just like help us all along a little bit. I'll say that, I'll put myself in that category. But it's also easy at the same time to not appreciate, in a way, what a thing it is actually to approach the kind of unbelievable degree of momentum and conditioning and distraction and compulsivity that is happening in these mind streams and in the society that we live in. And so we can be a little facile sometimes about mindfulness or about meditation, kind of just thinking like, well, if I sit down for a half an hour a day, you know, something really big should happen. And it's not to say that something doesn't happen from sitting down and practicing for a half an hour a day. I mean, that can be deceptively powerful. Right? And many of you know, say like, oh, I feel like I'm not very good at this, and I actually only do it a little bit, and I don't even do it every day, but I do it most days, and you notice real change in your life. I mean, that's wonderful. I hear that all the time, and that's good. But there are ways that if we, in meaning if you, and some of you will, really care about kind of transforming what's happening here, transforming your relationship to what's happening here, and transforming your understanding even of what's happening here, meaning in you, your mind and body. You have to pay a little more attention, or it requires more of us in terms of attending to the mind ground or preparing the mind ground even for meditation. You know, and so in this kind of the insight meditation tradition, there are particular practices which are taught and which are for preparing the mind ground. Right? And One whole domain of that has to do with conduct and how you are behaving in your life. I've talked about that in here many times, and I'm not going to kind of go into that in too detailed a way today, because I want to focus on a few other aspects. But that is a very important domain. Like, that's called sila in the tradition, or conduct. It has to do with how we relate to other human beings. And the Reader's Digest version is, when you're not harming others physically, when you are not taking what's not freely given, when you're not engaging in kind of harmful, divisive, untruthful speech, when you're not engaged in kind of committing harm through sexuality, and when you're not taking intoxicants that cloud the mind. I think I covered all 5. The mind stream is will be quieter, more settled, and more balanced, with less to think about and less remorse. So that's just the one domain that is part of preparing the mind ground. And if you are not paying attention to that domain and you think you're practicing meditation, you're missing something huge. Right? If you're like going around lying to people about things, your mind will not be settled. It just can't be. It's a cause and effect relationship. If you're lying to yourself about a lot of things, your mind will be turbulent. If you're engaged in some kind of very complex kind of politicking by talking behind people's back, your mind is going to be full of lots of busyness. Unnecessary busyness. I know you have other busyness that you may say is necessary. That's unnecessary. It makes it very complicated in here. So there's one example. Of course, if you're harming other people in physical ways, or through sexual energy or your sexuality, and I mean on like gross and subtle levels, either or, and everything in between, there will be not only a disturbance in your mind stream, even if there's not, because you're some unremorseful person, there will be disturbance in your human relationships, and that is, you will not have any kind of harmony in your life. So this is harming, whether it's through action, through sexuality, engaging in harmful or divisive or untrue speech, and stealing, taking what's not offered freely from others. Then you have to watch out, you have to plan and think, whether that's even gross level material things. Okay, I am talking about it because I have to, but or just taking energy, or being in the kind of always trying to get stuff from other people, whether it's attention or affection. And of course, I'm being very refined in the understanding of this. That kind of taking what's not freely given, that has a certain energy to it, which leads the mind to be unsettled. And of course, if you're taking, intoxicants, you will not have any kind of peace internally. Yeah. And by intoxicants, I don't mean like medication and stuff like that, right? But just you're taking drugs recreationally, or not more than recreationally. If you're this really, it is not conducive to clarity. Yeah, if you're drinking as a way of coping with your life, or just like drinking, just notice how it takes you out of clarity. Yeah? So that's a part of preparing the mind ground, is what's called sila. It's a very basic aspect, right? And again, each of these we could refine on so many levels, right? We could talk about, the sexuality one you can refine on so many levels, having to do with how you're using energy, or how you're, whether you're being manipulative or coercive in the way you approach people. Of course, we could refine the harming one on so many levels too, to, harming through our social conditioning or our, racist, unconscious racist conditioning or homophobic conditioning, what have you. All these layers of conditioning we harm with. Again, we can refine that in so many levels, right? And pay attention on those levels. But I hope you're all including this. I'm not going to talk much more about it tonight because I want to talk about some other elements. But it's always important to mention. Right? And you can start noticing how when you refine this a little bit, this is not about getting to some place of perfect virtue. If you do that, that's another trap. My behavior is perfect. Is that liberation? No. It's not. That's not liberation. That's you being perfect. Some of you are really good at that. The ones of you who are really good at that never feel like you're perfect, but you're good at it on some level. So that's not liberation, that kind of perfection. Perfection of virtue is not liberation. Yeah, but it is an important part of the cause and effect relationship with your own mind stream. Okay? To say it in a gross level way, when you're out there robbing and stealing, it's hard to stop looking over your shoulder. Okay? So, one element. The other element I want to try to talk about a little today is the kind of, and this doesn't, I think, get talked about enough maybe in our tradition, is the layer of kind of energy. It's like the subtle energy system in the body. And a lot of it, we don't have even a word for that in our culture. It's like subtle energy, what are you talking about? It sounds very new agey. And then subtle, how you doing? I don't know, the subtle energy is a little off today, subtle energy. But whatever you want to call it, the energetic system, you do have a relationship to that, and you can notice it just like when you have too much coffee. Or sometimes if you have too much stimulation that is not from a substance like caffeine. And then you try to meditate. You ever try to meditate late in a day when you've had a lot going on and your system's kind of like, and you're with the breath, but it's like the let's call it the nervous system. It's related to the nervous system, but we can include the nervous system in this just because we have a word for that. How do we work with the layer of the nervous system as preparing the ground for meditation? Yeah, so that's a dimension that we could stand to work with a little bit, is the nervous system. So I just want to mention it a little so we can pay attention to it. Yeah. So sometimes or sometimes if say it's not wired up, there's not a lot of restlessness like that, but there's a lot of sinking energy or almost like a depression energy. Sometimes sitting down to meditate is not the thing because it kind of like, one gets almost like sinks more into that, or especially if you have a kind of clinical depression, you sit in that kind of sinking feeling, that can be overwhelming in not a helpful way. The energetic system almost gets pulled down into. So I want to mention this so that you can pay attention both to the sila, the conduct aspect, but also to this energy system, nervous system aspect. That sometimes you can work through that just with the breathing. Some people they can get calm enough with the breath and the whole system just quiets down. But sometimes it can be helpful to have a little, to work with it in other ways. So in some traditions, not in the tradition that I kind of practice and come from, but for example, actually, I had a teacher in the Chinese Zen lineage, and they do a lot of prostrations. So I was thinking of the Tibetans, of course, they do a lot of prostrations, it's like a part of their preliminary practices, and that's a word that's kind of useful. Preliminary practices means like things you do before you get a lot of teachings sometimes. before you get more, even some of the awareness teachings, like preliminary practices, do 100,000 prostrations, full prostrations, where you bow down on the ground and you lay out fully, and then you come back to standing. That's kind of like a spiritual push-up, but even more involved, you know. And so anyway, so I haven't practiced in that tradition, but in the Chan tradition, where I have practiced a little bit, had a teacher, wonderful teacher, doing these prostrations, where you bow down to the ground. Of course, there could be a Buddha statue in front of you, but there doesn't need to be, because if this is not the Buddha, I don't know what is. Yeah, I said that. So you do full prostration, put your head down on the ground, and you come back up to standing. I'm not going to demonstrate it here, but we could do that sometime if we want to. But I want to just mention that as, of course, that has all these elements to it. Sometimes prostrating to like a statue of like Kuan Yin, the Bodhisattva of compassion. But I want to get at a little bit of the inside of this. What's happening when you bow down your body fully onto the ground? You put your head down. There's a kind of a surrender in it, isn't there? And so you're surrendering to like a Buddha, whatever you think that is, or Buddha nature, or compassion. You bow down all the way, and you come back up to standing, and then you bow down again all the way. And you do that 108 times or 1,000 times. So it's preparing the mind ground in a certain way. One is kind of like gesture of opening to things as they are, or bowing down or humbling yourself. That's so powerful. But humbling yourself to something transcendent, or Buddha nature, or Bodhisattva of compassion, not just to like, sometimes we can be used to having to humble ourselves to like your boss, or some abusive figure, right, or some system that is oppressing you in some way, and you have to humble yourself in some way, outer way, to like just to survive, right? And this is a very different kind of humbling ourselves, right? Sort of like to something, just even the attitude of like the Buddha, the historical Buddha, or something liberated, or the nature of your own awakened awareness, that attitude of. So there's something very powerful in that practice, not just because you can think about how you're preparing the mind that way, but there's something very physical and energetic about that, about getting down like that and bowing that, and then having to get back up. It's physical. And that's something sometimes in our meditation we don't do enough of. We don't have enough physical. So a lot of people are into yoga. So I want to say, yoga, originally, of course, the Hatha yoga was meant to be a preparation for meditation, and actually an integral part of meditating. Now, a lot of times today, people are doing yoga in a way that's not like that. But I want to talk about this because I'm not going to talk about a specific form, but I would like to invite you, probably many of you do yoga, or you do Tai Chi or Qigong or something physical. I would like to have you think about that in a way that is not separate from our meditation, so that you can work with your physical system even before you meditate or sit. If you did 100 prostrations and then sit, just try it. You could even, look on YouTube how to do a prostration. I'm sure I haven't done this, but I bet you find a way. And then you can see a nice tutorial. Does it matter what tradition? For our purposes, probably not. Just, yeah. Of course, you could also look up Chan Meditation Center and find the way they do the prostrations. It's kind of a nice way, too. So, but anyway, think of that physical, energetic system. So at the end of your day, you're going to meditate. You do something as energizing or as exhausting as 108 prostrations, and then sit. And just notice how that works with the system, the energy system. Does that affect the stillness or the stability, or allow you to settle, or allow some of that jittery, what do we call that, buzzy energy from the day to just work itself out? So it's not that that's like necessary, it's that this is an integral part of what we're working with when we work with our own mind and body, is this kind of nervous system energy, or energy of even subtle energy you can call, which sometimes you get very aware of when you meditate. One can. This is a non-physical kind of energy. So you can even, I was joking with somebody in one of our intensives, and maybe you've heard me tell this story, and they were mentioning this kind of sinking energy of depression that they worked with, and having that happen in meditation, and thinking, should I continue? Do I keep practicing? I said, why don't you get up in the middle of your meditation and do 50 burpees, and then sit down again. When you feel that sinking energy, do 50 burpees, and then sit down again, and see how the quality of the mind is. And it seemed like that was helpful, you know. But what I was pointing to is that in the tradition, like, you know, the Buddha was very, I won't say experimental, because I don't know if it was experimental, but the Buddha gave a lot of different people a lot of different practices. In the texts, you see that, like weird things that, because the Buddha could tell this is part of what makes a Buddha, I guess, right? Could tell kind of, at least in the story, and there's a useful teaching underneath this, the kind of like, what was the pattern that was locked in, and could have a sense of what would free it, you know. So, but we sometimes, nowadays, of course you have to understand the essence before you go tinker with a tradition. But we can play with some of the forms a little bit, and that you can notice, okay, so we're working with the energy in this way, and look what happens. Yeah. So the 50 burpees are not a break from the meditation. That's you're fully present doing them. You don't all have to do this. Trust your body. You could do anything else. You could just like walk or do a little movement with your arms. Sit back down. And again, it's just like working with the energy system, the nervous system. So I want you to kind of have even this language so that this is part of this territory for you. And not thinking you have to do everything, like calm your whole nervous system just with the breathing, for example. Because sometimes, and for those of you who are deep into this, that may just be enough now. You have a background, you have a foundation. You've done the equivalent of these preliminary practices, and so you can really sit in a way that's available to you. Right? You can just, like, you can be all frazzly, and you sit and you attend to the breathing and nostrils and this thing, like, you know, even if it's frazzly, that there's a stability of wakefulness, and then it's a little bit different. But I hope, so I'm saying this so that you will include whatever physical exercise you do and not have it be another separate piece. Because what's happening nowadays, everything's getting cut off into these different pieces, and everybody's got like 10 practices that they have to do. I did my yoga, now I got to do my meditation, and now I did my my bee pollen shots, you know, and then my, you know, and when we stop seeing it all as separate, we start to see this as part of a system. Even learning or studying about it can be included in helping to shape and reshape your own mind. Yeah. So preparing the mind ground in some ways, I want you to just have this. There's the conduct element. There's also the energy system / nervous system element, which for most of us living in the kind of jobs and situations that we live in, not to mention the kind of trauma of a lot of kinds of work on a daily basis. If you work, you know, as a first responder, or you work as a doctor or a therapist, or you work with communities that are living in kind of a systemic trauma, or you are living yourself in a community that is experiencing systemic trauma, like this is embedded in the nervous system in a way. This gets embedded, and we have to have some way of just even acknowledging that. Right? Because it's almost not fair sometimes to just ask ourselves or each other to be able to just like find calm or stability or stillness when there's this resonance at play in the system, in the nervous system. Right? So again, I'm not prescribing some kind of antidote, but just to say it's useful to include. Yeah? And so I have found personally in my own practicing, and I had periods where, you know, and me, this is coming from a place of privilege too, right? I did not have like some significant, you know, traumas or of course, having the privilege of, whiteness in the society and not living subject to that kind of, the kind of systemic daily insults and injuries that are, so prevalent in so many of our communities. Also, living in a man's body and not, being subject to the real dangers, right, that are so, and so much of this is also something I'm becoming more aware of now, and just, as the Me Too is happening and all this, and this is not a surprise to so many people, so many of you know about this, but just this awakening around how much trauma is present in all of our communities, right? But so anyway, this is, as somebody, even without living in those conditions myself, even so, these energetic practices or working with the energy system was so helpful, right? And so I think even more necessary and useful and important to include when you are living in a way maybe where you're still exposed. I know some of you in your work too, just exposed to vicarious trauma daily, working with some of your clients or people that you're working with. So how to work on this nervous system level, and there's many different modalities for working with it, but just to include that on some level. Now, when you work with the breathing in this manner of surrendering, relaxing into, you are also working with the nervous system. That's a big part of what samadhi is. It's a big part of what samadhi comes about in part through this kind of a settling of the energy and nervous system. Samadhi meaning concentration or unification. Okay? So it's not that in some traditions they're sort of like hardcore about it, sort of like, this is the way to do it, and it's really just the breath at the nostrils. And that has a power to it, and it works for some percentage of folks. Some of the time. But it's actually also helpful to have many ways of working with this system. Okay? And so I think that's an important piece, I'll just say, around whether it's exercise or physicality, or Tai Chi, Qigong, wonderful ways of learning how to relax in the nervous system while it's engaged, or yoga, whatever it is. But to include that and think of it as an aspect of your meditation. Both because you're mindful while doing it, you're present, and that way it actually is seamlessly integrated, but also because it gets to work with another aspect of your being, of who you are. And just, it's so useful to acknowledge. So I want to just mention that too. Right? And so we have the sila, the conduct element. We have the energetic or nervous system element. And then, and in conjunction with this, not in a linear way, because this isn't linear, but these pieces all work together, we have the samadhi element, the concentration element. And this is something that is just under-attended to in all, generally, not all, but generally in communities where people are meditating, is that we're not really cultivating samadhi. Right? And that has to do with in whether it's using the breath as an object or whether it's using hearing as an object. So it's not like it has to be one thing you're attending to. So for some people, the breathing is just too tight and constricted, so sounds are more useful. But it has to do with this continual letting go of control and controlling, and letting go into present moment wakefulness with some object as a support, whether it's the breath sensations at the nostrils or through the whole body, or whether it's the sounds appearing in the environment, or even the sense of the whole body sitting. Yeah, but when you're with the breathing in that way, what are you doing? Are you building up moments in a row of mindfulness, stringing them together? No. What do you get then? A long string of constructed mindfulness, held together by you holding on. I'm aware, I'm aware, I'm aware. I'm still aware. No. You let the body breathe in, you like a passenger along for the ride, or you're along for the ride, and you're continually letting go of control and controlling. And this is what allows the mind to settle. It's actually the letting go of that tinkering it's the tinkering that keeps the mind agitated in a lot of ways, that allows stillness to emerge here. And most people don't want to spend much time with their breathing. They want to get on to the exciting stuff. And if you're interested in your own mind, it's good to start watching your mind from the beginning, because interest that's the best driver of meditation, right? Of inquiry is interest. What the hell is going on in here? Why does it feel like this to be me? How is my sense of who I am being constructed moment to moment? What is it even? I want to find out. That's the best motivator. The other best motivator, equally good, is suffering, and usually they go together. I am suffering like crazy. What is going on inside of me? Yeah, I know what's going on outside, and there may be very real things that are happening outside to me, but what's happening in here, and how can I attend to that while not ignoring the outside? I'll say that too. Right? So, but what's happening here? So that's a very, at some point you can let the development of samadhi get hooked into that motivation, because without stability, it's very hard to watch your mind. So that was really motivating to me in the beginning. I want to know what's going on in here. How can I be equipped to do it? And I was read about it. I said, like, samadhi, you need stability. So I was like very faithful to my nostrils, because I wanted to get stable. And again, ruthlessly letting go of directionality in time, just abiding here. It doesn't have to be the nostrils, again, it could be the belly, the chest. But I was very committed to that because I wanted to see. So that's another element of preparing the ground. And I will say most people are not understanding, I think, how important that is. That's why in the intensive I have us do a few weeks of just mostly breath. Yeah. And in the intensive, people practicing for an hour a day, but that's like, again, if you're really committing to this, then it's not like this long path in time. It might not take that long to develop enough samadhi to really start seeing quite clearly. And then once the seeing gets strong, that starts to enhance the samadhi too. So it's worth your time. And it's also worth your energetic engagement. So a lot of times people are just logging time on the cushion. I did my meditation. Why? Because the clock says I did. And it's not you bringing your real interest or the actual intention again and again to let go of control, of let go of future making, let go of identity making. It's like me doing my meditation. And you could do your meditation forever, and guess what? It's still you doing your thing. And that's what's one of the things that's so powerful about real samadhi practice, is that we're letting go. When you're letting go into the breathing, you're letting go of identity. You're letting go of control. You're letting go even of being oriented in time and space in the usual ways. You're letting go of past and future. Do you realize how much letting go that is? It's a lot. You're letting go of all the reference points that we're usually holding on to get a sense of like, here I am. This is where I find security. I'm going, no matter what's happening now, I'm on my way there. Right? Do you ever feel that way? And that can be helpful, right? That can get you through a lot. But this is a kind of there's a ruthlessness to this, and that's why it's so profoundly liberating. Right? So again, it doesn't mean you bring tension or striving to practice. It means you bring a kind of, really understanding that freedom might be possible. And that could be very motivating. And I think it's a big piece of what's missing nowadays is people, is we don't have faith. And I don't mean like blind faith, but I mean when there's faith in a teacher or a teaching, the mind ground is also prepared differently. And we know that just from not meditation stuff, right? It's like when you have faith that it's possible to, I forget, is it the 4-minute mile, whatever? Yeah, when people know something's possible, a lot of people can all of a sudden do it. And that's, so there's a lot of things like that, even in your own daily life. So like, oh, now I know it's possible, and now all of a sudden. So a lot of time with meditation and stuff, it's like that too. There's like a lot of what I think keeps people from really letting go into it is that we don't actually, there's not enough faith yet. Because when there is, in the tradition they talk about faith as one of the spiritual powers, which means, it's translated a little bit as resting your heart on something. Now just think about when you're resting your heart, do you feel more or less present? If your heart is resting, it's that's a little more present. Just like when you're with somebody you trust and you can be yourself, you don't have to put on any faces or facades, or you don't have to pretend anything. Can you be a little more or less present? A little more present. And so when these elements are come together, right, some basic living in some way that is not just conducive to more mental chaos in terms of our conduct. And I know that's only part of what you can control. That's only part of what you can attend to. Yeah? When we are attending to this energetic system and treating it with some kind of attentiveness. And that means you're taking care of your nervous system too, in a way, which is not always overriding it. Sometimes people even override their own nervous system around meditation stuff. It's like, well, this doesn't feel right to me, this teacher doesn't seem right to me, I don't like, but I'm going to make myself do it because I'm going to get liberated. And that has an impact. It's kind of like, it can be almost traumatizing or re-traumatizing to override some of your organic knowing. That's a tough balance when you're trying to get out of your conditioning and not live just in your conditioning. It's easy to then say, like, everything that comes up in me is my conditioning. But it's not. Some of it is your natural intelligence. Some of it is the signals that your organism has been sending to you your whole life that you've been ignoring, or been taught to ignore or to override. And that has an impact on the energy system and on the nervous system. So when we attend to this in both of those ways, both by whatever practices allow us to work with this system, and also by honoring and attending to your natural human systems or instincts, right? So like, let's leave this situation, let's go. That allows this nervous system element to be worked with, or this energy system a little bit. Yeah. Of course, there are more particular practices around this, but let's just treat this for now. And then the samadhi element, which is in conjunction with those two, and in a way requires them to some degree, and also requires something of you if you care about this. Yeah. So I would encourage all of you, especially if you're just getting into this, to spend more time with the breathing. And not just with the breathing, and not just more time in segments, but more honoring, more letting go into, more let it again and again. That's what real samadhi practice is, really letting go again and again of the constructs and the constructing. It's a hugely liberating in itself, yeah, and can be quite transformative too. And this is all aspects of preparing the mind ground to see deeply into the nature of things, to see deeply into the nature of our own mind and body, deeply into the nature of our own being, to see through some of the patterning that keeps us and keeps you locked in the old and in the past. And this requires a clarifying, in a sense, of the lens. A strengthening, a stabilizing, and a clarifying of the lens. And it's fine for you to be here and be interested at any level. I think that's important about Sunday night. It's not like you have to come here and sign up for like this huge thing, commit your life to it. But in any group like this, there will be some of you who they'll practice a little, and even the concepts sometimes will just be helpful to you. And that's fine, that's wonderful. And some of you will be there for a while or something, and then it will ignite a deeper interest, and you'll go on retreat, or you'll spend a little more of your heart energy attending to this, what's happening here, as if it mattered. And some of you will become obsessed. And you'll just have to know. And that's wonderful too. So, I think that's enough. We have time for a few questions, if you have any questions about what I said tonight or about practice and in general or in specific. Yeah, Evelyn.
So I've been noticing for a while habitual reactions to uncomfortable energy.
Uncomfortable energy?
Yeah. It's like a habitual reaction to like wanting to expel or get rid of the uncomfortable energy.
Is this energy in you or coming from other people?
In me.
Okay.
And it almost doesn't matter where the energy, like the actual like origin of the energy. There's just like these habitual boxes that like I translate that energy to. So like self-judgment or loneliness being examples.
Now, when you say energy, what does it feel like? Like, how do you?
It really does feel like energy in the body.
Mm-hmm.
I also I have anxiety that kind of pulls in the chest, but I'll notice like the trigger thought. I won't even. It's so habitual that like a trigger thought or phrase comes to mind, and I realize that there was this energy there until that trigger happened.
Yeah.
And sometimes I trace it back and be like, oh, okay, I see where that came from. And other times I'm like, that doesn't even make sense why it went to that box. It's so habitual that I think I just don't have enough boxes to send like uncomfortable, strong energy, and I'm feeling stuck in this.
Yeah, I'll say something and you tell me if this seems right to you, and if it doesn't, tell me that too, because it might not be. Sometimes you have a feeling that goes looking for a thought. And that's different than like a thought that generates a feeling. And so sometimes you're fine, you think like, oh shit, I didn't do my taxes. And then you have a feeling, or oh my God, I forgot to do this thing, or oh, I got to do it, and then you have a feeling. But sometimes you can have a feeling or a state, and it's just here. Sometimes you're anxious, but there actually isn't a thing you're anxious about. It's just anxious. Or there's a kind of unsettledness, or sometimes there's like a sinking energy, like almost like a downness or a dullness. And states like that, often we're really good at wanting to find meaning, and sometimes that becomes habitual. So if you have this down feeling, it often goes looking for a story. It's like a feeling goes looking for a story, because you don't have it. And that's a really good pattern to notice, because the story may have nothing to do with what's going on, But it's really just you're going to search for one. And it's good to see which direction it's going. And that way, if you notice that happening and it's habitual, you can just pull it back and say, like, I'm just going to be with this feeling. Some feelings are there, they're just here. They're not actually about anything particular. And maybe they're about something karmically, or, in my second to last lifetime, this happened and now it's coming back up. I'm not saying I subscribe to that. Just saying could be. So that's what it sounds like is happening.
Yeah, I think what happens though when I go back and I realize it's like more just a feeling that's happening that I'm responding to. And now has this extra layer of like judgment that came from the response that now I feel like it's hard to return to the original feeling.
What's the judgment about?
Well, it's like how I can explain it. This judgment, like self-judgmental kind of box comes up a lot. And so sometimes I notice it and then I can come back and be like, oh, it's not actually triggered by any kind of particular thought, it's just uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. But then I think I'm more like now worried about how to respond to the self-judgment, and it makes it harder to return to the feeling. What is the self-judgment about? Is it about having the feeling, or is it about something else? Self-judgment, I think, is in response to the habitual reaction.
And what's the reaction?
It's just anger at myself.
So you have a feeling, then you have anger at yourself for having the feeling?
Yeah. I'm not wanting to specific.
Oh, you don't want to be specific. Okay, that's helpful. Sorry, I'll stop prodding. But the reason I'm asking that way is because I think it actually is important for you to be specific internally. You don't have to be specific with a room full of people. But I think that matters because the sequence really matters, the actual sequence. And that's a big part of what happens of the way we practice meditation, is we get really good at seeing what's the actual sequence, right? And so that you can start to see like, oh, this judgment, or whatever the reaction is to whatever the experience is, so you get to start to see how that happens, especially if it's just patterned. Seeing that deeply is what starts to unwind it generally. So I think it would just be very good to pay attention to the specifics, because when you know deeply that you have a story that is kind of arbitrary, even if it's habitual, your system stops believing it as much. When you don't know it's arbitrary, it's real. So that piece of like getting closer to the sequence is what nobody wants to do it because it's unpleasant. It's very, very freeing, I think. So I think that's why the specifics do matter for you. And if we were talking individually, I would be interested in the specifics. What is the reaction? What is the thing that arises? What's the story about it? How, and how does that get reinforced internally? That makes sense?
There's more I can say, but
Okay. There's a hand up here. Yeah, how about in the back and then over here? Yeah.
I really appreciated sort of your discussion of some of these concepts and ideas. I always find it really helpful to have sort of some of that more big picture ideas and explanation of things.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if you have any recommendations for folks who are writing to extend on that a little bit.
On this topic today?
Yeah, on this topic, maybe just things that have influenced how you think about these things, big picture in general, but also on today's topic.
I've read like 1 million books.
What's your favorite?
What's my favorite? That's tough, because they're so different, right? But I'm trying to, like, for what kind of thing? Like, so, yeah, like, I think it'd be good, if you've been, so here's the thing about reading, like, so it depends, and it also depends on like how long you've been in this or how new you are. So I have like early recommendations, little bit middle recommendations. I should have something on the website that has like a bunch of different books. I'll do that. That's a long-term solution. I'll just say quickly, if you're newer, I would recommend reading Mindfulness in Plain English by Bhante Gunaratana. I love that no matter what layer you're at. Like even if you've been practicing for a long time, it's super clear and useful. I think if you've been practicing for a while and you've really been done some real retreat and intensive practice, it could be useful to read some of the early discourses of the Buddha, just to get a sense of what the classical teachings are, and then there are some other books about the Buddhist teachings, like what the Buddha taught. There's a really good book on the Four Foundations of Mindfulness by Analio, and and then there's different traditions. It's a mess, But I would say for most folks, I think the bias towards reading, I would read some, but mostly practice. Yeah, reading's not a substitute for practicing, but if you've been practicing for a while, reading can give you some helpful context. I was like, what are the Four Noble Truths? That can be helpful. What's concentration? What's mindfulness? That's why I like mindfulness in plain English so much. Super simple, but very clear. I'll do that on the website. I'll put a list of all the books you don't want to read.
Yeah, so you were talking about ways to influence the energy body, and I've been taught a lot of breath exercises, and those aren't, you didn't mention that at all. I wonder what your...
Breath exercise, like yogic, like pranayama kind of stuff?
Pranayama,
Yeah.
that's a way to influence your energy body.
Yeah, I would include that. That's not something I do or have done a lot of, but absolutely. I mean, that's the...
It's not in the Buddhist teachings, or... I get it from Hinduism, like yoga.
Yeah, there's a lot in the yoga. There's a whole yogic side to meditation that's not always talked about a ton, but yeah, I think that pranayama would be exactly in that category. Yeah. Now, again, I think some of the issue is that some of those breath practices, people are not, they haven't prepared the ground to do those. So those can actually be very disruptive to people's energy systems, especially if you're doing advanced energetic practices and you don't have a foundation. That can be really counter helpful, unhelpful. In fact, I remember hearing a particular, I don't know if he would say this publicly, so I'll just not say his name, but somebody who had done a couple 3-year retreats in the Tibetan tradition, and he's a Westerner, and he was saying that, and a long time ago, and he was saying that they had them do all these really advanced energy practices, and he felt like a lot of the Westerners really didn't do well with them, and that he felt like there were all these intermediate practices that maybe if you were grew up a yogi or you came from a culture where that was. But for most of us coming out of American junior high school, we need some preliminaries. They did preliminaries too, but I think that's why I like Tai Chi, Qigong, Hatha Yoga, these things that are gentle. Because if you do ramped up energy practices, it can be very destabilizing and kind of get the winds moving, and winds are the opposite of settledness. Sometimes the winds are moving already a little too much. So yeah, okay.
So one of the things I took away was about level of energy, or kind of this wanting to, restlessness almost. I've tried practicing in the morning when I have more of that. And then maybe after the gym where I'm a little bit tighter, in the evening with or without coffee. And the one thing that I've seen is that when I have the extra energy, either pre-gym or post-coffee, there's a little bit more happening in the mind, but I can get to deeper focus.
Yeah. When
I don't have the energy, it's duller and I'm more distracted. So is there a quality of the energy, or is there something more than the amount?
So there are these mental factors. Energy is one. Calm is another. And in the meditative traditions, they talk about these being balanced. When there's energy and calm together, there is that state where the calm has clarity to it. Yeah. So if there's an imbalance, too much energy, not enough calm. Ooh, too much calm, not enough energy. Sleepy meditation. So you could think, oh, now I got to tinker a lot. Now I got to like just have the right amount of coffee and do the perfect amount of exercise and then sit down and shit, it didn't work. You know? But that's the wrong attitude. I just want to talk about it generally. The problem with talking about relative stuff is that then people become perfect tinkerers. But I want to make a point. So energy, there's the kind of energy of coffee. There's also an energy that comes from concentration. So when the mind gets concentrated, it gives rise to a kind of energy that is really interesting. Yeah. So that energy can start to fuel your meditation. So it also, calm is one of the factors of awakening, and this calm starts to develop through concentration too. So at first you may feel like you're just approaching these externally, but soon you'll be approaching them internally, right? That this is actually elements of your cultivation that are present. And that's why usually fatigue is an early stage problem for people in meditation. But it's that kind of fatigue kind of goes away at a certain point because there's enough concentration that there's energy present in that way. It doesn't mean you don't get tired, but it has a different quality to it. So I would say that. So it's good that you're noticing those differences. I wouldn't get into, for all of you, trying to find the perfect energetic state before you meditate. That would be undoing all the teaching I've been doing for the past years here. I just want you to include the physical and the energetic in your worldview, and include sila, conduct, and have a deference for samadhi. Yeah. So it's great you notice that, yeah, and I think you're right. I would prefer you guys practice when you have energy, so that you can see something and learn something, and not just practice when you're at your most fatigued. You know, I did my half hour, but I just slept through the whole thing. Yeah. Okay, we have time maybe for one more. Yes, please.
So this is more of a general question. I heard from a couple of different meditation teachers that folks with trauma might want to be more cautious around meditation. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are around that in terms of, like different PTSD flashes that come up during your practice.
Yeah. So the question was about trauma, and some people have talked about, you know, are there particular ways of working around trauma or with trauma in meditation? And I would say yes. Everybody, so there's general teachings, like when we come to a meditation group, in a way you have to say something general because there's so many people in the room. But actually, every one of us needs to learn to work specifically with our own mind and body. And, you know, and so there need to be modifications. And that's actually the importance of generally and traditionally of having a teacher, right? Somebody who can help you tailor in a way some of what's arising. So I would say absolutely. And I could also recommend a good book about this, which is somebody I went to school with, David Trevleven. Have you heard of him? He has a book called Trauma Sensitive Mindfulness. It's pretty new. I would recommend it. It has a lot of adaptation, more than I could talk about it tonight. I'd recommend it to all of you. Ways of adapting practice. Because basically, the short version is, you don't want to, you know, what's traumatic about trauma is it overwhelms the system. And so we want to learn to have meditation not be a re-overwhelming of the nervous system in a way that becomes kind of re-traumatizing. Right? And not just like, I'm forced to sit quietly with this overwhelm, or forcing myself to sit quietly. And so we want to find ways of practicing to balance out so that you stay within a window of kind of like, I can be here with what's happening, or I can shift my attention. So there's a lot of like pendulating, you know, so we can like be present. If it feels overwhelming, it's like put your attention in your toe, or look around the room, just to kind of settle and reground, that kind of thing. So there's so many different ways of working on that micro level, and I think it's good to think about. Yeah, and yeah, when teachers don't have any background, I'm not an expert in that either, but I think it is important to talk about and think about. Even things like the breath as an anchor. Sometimes hearing is a much better anchor if the body feels like not a safe place. Because hearing is sort of like expansive and spacious, And you don't have to feel like maybe if my body doesn't feel like a friendly place, I don't feel like I'm stuck in it or something. I can have some space. And then the body can be included in a bigger awareness. That's just one example. So, yeah, that is why it's important. So there's the general teaching, and then there's the tailored teaching. And traditionally, it should be, in a sense, tailored to each student. Right? Now, logistically, that can be hard, but it should be, because we're all a little different. We're working a little differently. And trauma is a huge part of what's in any room. Right? And so, yeah, we have to work with our nervous systems and our systems in this way. And we want to do it in a way where we're not re-overwhelming ourselves. And so we can start to digest our experience in little ways and not all at once. Thank you for that. I think that's a really important topic. And so again, that book is called Trauma Sensitive Mindfulness. Yeah, and I would recommend it. You can find it on Amazon, where all mindfulness lives.
You can order it at your local bookstore.
And you can order it at your local bookstore. Thank you. That would be better. Okay, so let's just sit for a few moments.